Two brothers stood frozen in time, their faces clear after more than a century. But when the photo was restored, something impossible emerged. Another face, staring back from the shadows. A face that was never there before. Michael Harrington had always been drawn to forgotten things. As a freelance photo restoration specialist in the small town of Millbrook, Connecticut, he made his living, breathing life back into faded memories. The old daguerreotypes and sepia portraits that crossed his desk told stories of lives long past, but none had prepared him for what arrived on that dreary October morning. The package came with no return address, containing only a severely damaged 1897 photograph and a handwritten note. Found this in the walls during renovation of the old Whitmore estate. Thought you might find it interesting. A friend. The photograph showed two identical young men in formal Victorian attire, standing stiffly before an ornate parlor backdrop. What caught Michael's attention wasn't the typical damage of age, water stains, creases, and fading, but something far more unsettling. As Michael began the painstaking digital restoration process, scanning the image at the highest resolution, he noticed an anomaly between the two brothers. What first appeared to be a shadow or trick of the light gradually revealed itself as something else entirely. Hour by hour, as he carefully adjusted contrast and removed decades of deterioration, a third face began to emerge from the space between the twins. The face was younger, perhaps that of a child, with hollow, desperate eyes that seemed to stare directly at the camera. The expression was one of pure terror, as if the boy was trying to scream, but couldn't. Michael's hands trembled as he saved his work and leaned back in his chair. He had restored thousands of photographs in his 15-year career, but he had never encountered anything like this. A face that wasn't supposed to be there, appearing as if by supernatural intervention. Driven by curiosity and a growing sense of unease, Michael began researching the Whitmore family. The local historical society's records showed that the Whitmore twins, Edmund and Edgar, were prominent textile merchants in the late 1800s. They had inherited their father's mill and expanded it into one of the region's most successful enterprises. However, the records were strangely silent about any third sibling. Birth certificates, family Bibles, and census records all confirmed only two sons. Yet the face in the photograph was undeniably real, captured by the camera's unblinking eye over a century ago. Michael found himself staying up late into the night, poring over genealogical websites and newspaper archives, searching for any mention of a third Whitmore child. The more he searched, the more convinced he became that someone had deliberately erased this boy from history. The breakthrough came when Michael discovered a brief mention in an 1898 issue of the Millbrook Gazette, buried in the social announcements. The Whitmore family requests privacy during this difficult time of mourning. No details, no obituary, no name, just a vague acknowledgement of loss. Michael's investigation revealed that the Whitmore estate had been abandoned shortly after 1898, with the twins mysteriously disappearing from all public records. The property had changed hands multiple times over the decades, with each owner reporting strange occurrences. Unexplained sounds, cold spots, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Local folklore had grown around the house, with children daring each other to approach the rusted gates, whispering about the brother they buried alive. Michael had always dismissed such stories as small-town superstition, but now, staring at the terrified face in the photograph, he wondered if there might be truth hidden in the legends. As Michael prepared to leave his studio that evening, the photograph seemed different somehow. The mysterious third face appeared more distinct, the eyes more accusatory, as if the boy was trying to communicate something urgent across the span of more than a century. Michael's rational mind told him it was just his imagination, that hours of staring at the image had created false patterns and imagined details. But his instincts, honed by years of bringing hidden truths to light through his restoration work, told him otherwise. Something terrible had happened to this child, something that the Whitmore twins had tried to hide forever. Michael made a decision that would change his life irrevocably. He would find the truth, no matter where it led him. He carefully locked the photograph in his safe, but as he turned off the lights, he could swear he heard the faint sound of a child crying in the darkness. Some secrets refused to stay buried. Michael's obsession with the Whitmore photograph consumed him entirely. He contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic photo analyst at the State University, claiming he needed her expertise for a historical documentation project. When Dr. Chen examined the restored image, her face went pale. She confirmed what Michael had suspected. The third face wasn't a photographic artifact or double exposure. The spectral analysis and pixel density analysis proved that all three figures had been photographed simultaneously, under identical lighting conditions. More disturbing still, she detected signs that the photograph had been deliberately altered after development, with careful brushwork obscuring the third figure. Someone in 1897 had tried to erase the boy from the image, but hadn't succeeded completely. The original photographer had captured something that someone desperately wanted hidden. Armed with this evidence, Michael drove to the abandoned Whitmore estate on the outskirts of town. The Victorian mansion loomed against the gray November sky, its once grand facade now weathered and broken. Broken shutters hung at odd angles, and ivy had claimed most of the exterior walls. The current owner, a real estate development company, had given up trying to renovate the property after 3 construction crews quit, citing unusual circumstances. Michael circled the house, noting the foundation's strange irregularities, areas where the stonework appeared newer, as if sections had been rebuilt or reinforced. In the back garden, beneath decades of overgrowth, he discovered the remnants of what appeared to be a small cemetery. 3 weathered headstones bore the names Edmund Whitmore, Edgar Whitmore, and a third stone so eroded that the name was illegible. But the dates were clear. All 3 had died within days of each other in late 1898. Michael's heart raced as he realized the implications. If all 3 brothers had died within days of each other, then who had taken the photograph? And why had the twins' deaths been recorded while the third brother's identity remained a mystery? He began visiting elderly residents of Millbrook, collecting fragments of stories passed down through generations. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, 93 years old, and the town's unofficial historian, remembered her grandmother's stories about the Whitmore family. According to the tales, there had been a third brother named Ezra, younger than the twins by several years. The old woman's eyes grew distant as she recounted whispered stories of jealousy and greed, of a family business that could only support 2 heirs, and of a terrible decision made in the name of preservation. "They say young Ezra was different," she told Michael, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sickly, simple-minded, not fit for business." The twins saw him as a burden, a threat to their inheritance. The more Michael learned, the more horrifying the picture became. Multiple sources suggested that Ezra had been hidden away, kept from public view as the twins consolidated their power and wealth. Some stories claimed he had been locked in the house's cellar, others that he had been sent away to an asylum. But the most chilling account came from a handwritten journal Michael found in the town's historical archives, written by Dr. Marcus Reed, the family physician in 1897. Dr. Reed's entries spoke of being called to the Whitmore estate repeatedly to treat a young patient who was being kept in unfortunate circumstances. The doctor's growing concern was evident in his progressively more disturbed handwriting. His final entry, dated just days before the family's mysterious disappearance, contained a single haunting line. "God forgive me. I can no longer be party to this cruelty. The boy must be freed, or I fear what demons we are creating." Michael returned to his studio and stared at the photograph with new understanding. The terror in Ezra's eyes wasn't just fear. It was the desperate plea of someone who knew he was about to die. The formal pose of the twins, their stiff postures and cold expressions, suggested they had orchestrated this photograph as some sort of twisted documentation of their crime. Perhaps they had forced Ezra to stand between them one final time before carrying out their ultimate plan. Michael felt sick as he considered the possibilities. Had they buried Ezra alive, as local legends suggested? Had they murdered him outright and hidden the body? The photograph seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, as if Ezra's tortured spirit was still trying to tell his story. Michael knew he had to find physical evidence, something concrete that would prove what had happened to the forgotten Whitmore brother. He made plans to return to the estate the next morning, this time equipped with ground-penetrating radar equipment borrowed from a friend in construction. The dead don't rest until justice is served. Michael arrived at the Whitmore estate at dawn, accompanied by his friend Jake Morrison, a contractor who had experience with archaeological surveys. The ground-penetrating radar revealed several anomalies beneath the house's foundation and in the surrounding grounds. The most significant disturbance was directly beneath what had once been the main parlor, the same room where the photograph had been taken. Michael had obtained permission from the development company to conduct his historical survey, though he hadn't revealed the true nature of his investigation. As Jake operated the radar equipment, Michael explored the house's interior, searching for any clues that might have survived more than a century of abandonment. In the basement, behind a false wall that had partially collapsed over the years, he discovered a hidden room. The chamber was small, barely large enough for a single person, with thick stone walls and no windows. Rusted chains hung from iron rings embedded in the walls, and the floor was covered with decades of debris and decay. But most disturbing were the scratch marks carved deep into the stone, desperate, frantic gouges made by human fingernails. Michael's flashlight beam revealed words etched into the wall in a childish hand. "Ezra Whitmore, I am real. I am here." The scratches told a horrifying story of prolonged captivity, of a young man slowly going mad in isolation. Among the debris, Michael found fragments of a journal written on scraps of paper. The ink faded but still legible. Ezra's own words described years of imprisonment, of being fed just enough to survive, of listening to his brothers, conducting business above, while he rotted in darkness. The entries grew increasingly incoherent as time passed, chronicling Ezra's descent into madness and despair. The radar survey confirmed Michael's worst fears. Beneath the parlor floor, approximately 6 feet down, was a wooden structure consistent with a coffin. Jake, now fully aware of the investigation's true purpose, helped Michael carefully excavate the area. What they found defied comprehension in its cruelty. The coffin was crude, hastily constructed, and bore evidence of desperate clawing from the inside. The brass nameplate read simply, E. Whitmore, 1898. But the most damning evidence was what they found beside the coffin: a photographer's equipment case and glass plates from 1897. The twins had documented their crime, taking the photograph as Ezra stood unknowingly over his own prepared grave. The glass plates contained additional images, shots of the hidden basement room, of Ezra in chains, and finally of the burial itself. The twins had created a complete photographic record of their brother's imprisonment and murder. Michael's hands shook as he developed the glass plates using historical techniques. The images revealed the full scope of the twins' depravity. One photograph showed Ezra being forced to pose for what would be his final portrait, tears streaming down his face as he stood between his smiling brothers. Another captured him being lowered into the coffin while still alive, his mouth open in a silent scream. The final image was the most chilling: Edmund and Edgar standing beside the freshly filled grave, raising glasses in a toast to their success. These weren't the actions of men driven to desperation. They were the calculated moves of psychopaths who had planned and executed the perfect crime. The formal family photograph that had started Michael's investigation now made perfect sense. It was a monument to their victory, a final humiliation of their victim, taken moments before they sealed Ezra's fate forever. Michael realized that Dr. Reed had likely discovered the truth and confronted the twins, leading to his mysterious death just days later. The physician's body had been found in the river, officially ruled a suicide, but now obviously another murder. The twins had eliminated everyone who knew their secret before disappearing themselves, probably assuming new identities in another state. But their careful planning had one fatal flaw. They had been unable to completely erase Ezra from the photograph. His spirit, his pain, his desperate desire for justice had somehow imprinted itself on the image, waiting more than a century for someone to see the truth. Michael sat in the ruined parlor as the sun set, surrounded by the evidence of a crime that had gone unpunished for over 120 years. The photograph lay before him, but now Ezra's face seemed peaceful, as if finally being seen and believed had brought him some measure of rest. Some truths are worth waiting a century to tell. Michael's discovery sent shockwaves through Millbrook and beyond. The story of the Whitmore brothers became national news, with forensic experts confirming the authenticity of both the photographic evidence and the physical remains. DNA analysis of Ezra's bones revealed evidence of prolonged malnutrition and signs of physical abuse consistent with long-term imprisonment. The medical examiner confirmed that Ezra had indeed been buried alive, with scratch marks inside the coffin lid matching the fingernail fragments found embedded in the wood. The case was officially reopened as a homicide investigation, though the perpetrators had been dead for over a century. Michael worked closely with investigators to piece together the complete timeline of events, using the photographic evidence and historical records to build an irrefutable case against the twins. The revelation transformed how the town viewed its own history. Streets named after the Whitmore brothers were rechristened, and the Historical Society removed all positive references to Edmund and Edgar from their displays. A new memorial garden was created on the site of the Whitmore estate, with Ezra's name prominently displayed alongside Dr. Reed's, honoring both victims of the twins' cruelty. The discovery sparked renewed interest in other unsolved historical crimes, with investigators across the country re-examining old cases where evidence might have been overlooked or deliberately concealed. Michael found himself in demand as an expert in historical photo analysis, helping law enforcement agencies solve cold cases using similar techniques. The Whitmore case became a landmark example of how modern technology could bring justice to historical crimes. But the most profound impact was on Michael himself. The investigation had changed him fundamentally, making him acutely aware of how easily truth could be buried, and how important it was to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves. He established the Ezra Whitmore Foundation, dedicated to investigating historical injustices and giving voice to forgotten victims. The foundation worked with genealogists, historians, and forensic experts to uncover suppressed stories and ensure that victims like Ezra were finally acknowledged. Michael's photo restoration business evolved into something larger, a mission to use technology and determination to shine light into the darkest corners of the past. The original photograph was donated to the National Archives, where it served as a powerful reminder that some crimes echo across centuries, waiting for the right person to hear their call. The psychological impact on Michael was significant, but ultimately healing. He had nightmares for months, haunted by images of Ezra's suffering and the twins' calculated cruelty. But he also found peace in knowing that he had given Ezra what he had been denied in life: recognition, dignity, and justice. The photograph that had started as a restoration project became Michael's life's work, inspiring him to help other families find closure for their own historical mysteries. He never again looked at an old photograph the same way, always searching for the hidden stories, the forgotten faces, the suppressed truths that might be waiting to be discovered. The case earned Michael recognition from law enforcement agencies and historical societies nationwide. But the reward he treasured most was simpler: the knowledge that Ezra Whitmore was no longer forgotten, no longer erased from history. In giving voice to the silenced, we find our own purpose. 5 years after the discovery, Michael stood in the memorial garden that had been built on the former Whitmore estate. The space had been transformed from a site of horror into a place of remembrance and healing. Visitors came from around the world to see where one man's determination had uncovered a century-old crime and brought dignity to a forgotten victim. The garden featured a bronze statue of Ezra Whitmore, created from the restored photograph, showing him not as a victim, but as a young man full of potential, whose life had been cut short by greed and cruelty. Plaques throughout the garden told his story and honored Dr. Reed's courage in trying to save him. The memorial had become a pilgrimage site for those seeking justice for their own historical mysteries, and Michael often found flowers and notes left by visitors who had been inspired by Ezra's story. The Ezra Whitmore Foundation had grown into an internationally recognized organization, working on cases across 6 continents. Michael's team had helped solve dozens of historical crimes, from missing persons cases dating back to the Civil War, to suppressed stories of industrial accidents and family conspiracies. Each case brought its own challenges and revelations, but none had affected Michael as deeply as that first photograph. The Foundation's work had led to changes in how historical evidence was preserved and analyzed, with museums and archives adopting new protocols for examining potentially altered documents and photographs. Michael had written a book about the Whitmore case, donating all proceeds to victim advocacy organizations, and had become a sought-after speaker on the intersection of technology, history, and justice. The original photograph remained the centerpiece of the Foundation's headquarters, displayed in a climate-controlled case where visitors could see the image that had started it all. But Michael had made an interesting discovery during a routine inspection of the photograph. Ezra's face had changed. The terror and desperation that had first caught Michael's attention were gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like peace. Forensic experts confirmed that the photograph itself remained chemically unchanged, leading to speculation that Michael's imagination was simply projecting what he wanted to see. But Michael knew better. The boy who had waited 124 years to be acknowledged had finally found rest. The photograph served as a powerful reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of surfacing when the right person is willing to look. Michael's personal life had also been transformed by the experience. He had met Dr. Sarah Chen again during the Foundation's early days, and their shared commitment to uncovering historical truth had blossomed into love and partnership. They had married in the memorial garden, with Ezra's statue serving as a silent witness to their vows. Their work continued to evolve, incorporating new technologies like artificial intelligence and advanced spectral analysis to examine historical documents and photographs with unprecedented precision. But Michael never forgot the simple tools that had started it all: patience, determination, and the refusal to accept that some stories should remain untold. He kept a copy of that first photograph on his desk. Not the restored version, but the damaged original as it had arrived, as a reminder that the most important discoveries often begin with the willingness to look more closely at what others might dismiss. As Michael walked through the memorial garden on the anniversary of his discovery, he reflected on how one mysterious photograph had changed not just his life, but the lives of countless others. Families had found closure, historical injustices had been acknowledged, and forgotten victims had finally received the recognition they deserved. The Whitmore case had proved that the past was never truly past, that crimes and secrets had a way of demanding justice across the generations. Michael paused before Ezra's statue, noting the fresh flowers that anonymous visitors had left, and smiled. The boy, who had been buried alive, had ultimately achieved something his murderous brothers never could: immortality through the power of truth. His story would be told for generations, ensuring that his name would outlive those who had tried to erase it. The photograph that had started as a cry for help had become a beacon of hope for anyone who believed that justice, however delayed, was still worth pursuing. In the end, truth doesn't just survive, it triumphs.